Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today, Deltek Clarity AE Industry Study. This is the Turning Benchmarks into Growth presentation this afternoon with Scott Hirsch, who is the Managing Principal of our Architecture and Engineering Group, as well as Susan Patrick, who's the Director of Client Solutions for all of our Deltek products at Stanbaugh. Just a few housekeeping items before we pass it over to Scott to start us off here. The presentation is available in the handout section of the GoToWebinar pane. You can download that so you can follow along with Susan and Scott today as they walk through the presentation. And if you are here for the presentation and do want to get CPE credits, just please fill out the survey and answer the polling questions today. We have to get to an 85% participation rate in order to move on, just to make sure everybody's paying attention and absorbing all the information. And at the end with the survey, if there's any questions that weren't answered, you can drop them in there. And as for questions, there is a question panel in the GoToWebinar pane that you can submit all your questions to. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to Scott.
Good afternoon, everyone. Appreciate you attending today, and then an opportunity for us to share a little bit about what we're seeing in the 2018 Deltek Clarity Report, and how perhaps you can use this information to improve your firm's profitability and achieve the goals that you're trying to achieve. Just a little bit about the survey as an introduction here. There's 450 firms participating in the study. That is an increase. It's been increasing over the last couple of years, so it's a nice size survey. You can see the breakdown by small, medium, and large firms there on the slide. And it roughly mirrors the mix of the size of firms within the industry as a whole. You can see 12% of the firms are from the Northeast. The West and Midwest are a little bit more heavily weighted than some of the other areas of the country, and a small number from Canada. Definition of high-performing firms, we will mention this throughout the presentation, but to be a high-performing firm, they have to have a net labor multiplier of 3.0 or higher and an operating profit of 15% or greater. And high performers constitute about 23% of the survey respondents. So it's a good size sample of the industry. So as we're going along, if anyone has questions, please just poke them into the chat room there, and we will be paying attention to that. Or I guess you can also put it in the questions tab, and we'll be monitoring that and responding as they come along, or generically grouping them as needed. So anyway, enough rambling by me. Let's just jump into some financial statement information. The very first metric that everyone always wants to look at is profitability. How are we doing compared to the industry? We can see here that the operating profit on net revenue is up about 2.2% this year. Nothing dramatic, relatively flat compared to some of the years where we had a full percentage point or greater increase since the current strong economy started, probably almost 10 years ago. You can see in the graph in the upper right hand corner here how the high performers significantly outperform from the standpoint of profitability all other firms in the survey at a operating profit of over 22%. I think what we're seeing here is that firms are continuing to grow. All the information we're indicating is that firms are growing, hiring people, but that growth, those additional revenues, are not being converted into profits any faster than has happened historically. Usually what you expect is that with increasing revenues, that overhead stays relatively constant, so you see an improvement in the percentage of operating profit on net revenue, more dramatic than the 0.2%, which I would, may even be within the realm of the statistical a statistical anomaly that it isn't even the same as last year. So, keeping that in mind, most likely what we're seeing is efficiency is starting to decline. Firms are having challenges to generate additional profits from the investment they're making in people and processes and so forth. Utilization rate, one of the key drivers in profitability and performance for any professional services firm, not just AE, is actually declining. It's been declining, for the last several years, and what we suspect is driving a lot of this is the war for talent. We're having to hire people rapidly to deal with our revenue growth, and we're not where we need to be in terms of our onboarding processes, getting people into productivity as quickly as possible, and then also retaining those key people that are high performers and are well versed in our systems and processes and are really out there making us money. I believe that the area here where firms can really take advantage of this information is to know that we need to be better at bringing on new people. We need to be better at our onboarding processes. We need to focus on training people well from day one, and not spending more time than necessary, but spending the right amount of time to make sure that they're ready to become productive. Voluntary turnover is the other thing I think that's very important to be monitoring. That is a very expensive, as you lose talent, you lose your productive people who go somewhere else for more money or a better experience. I think it's very important today that firms focus not just on the usual things like compensation and bonuses, but in really the employee experience and making your organization a destination of talent where people want to work, want to go to, so that allows you to retain better retention, and then to hire better as well. Net labor multiplier, the other metric that's so important to profitability, has also declined from 3.02 to 2.96. Given the shift in utilization and the challenges with talent, it might mean that we're subbing more work out as well. And sub-consulting work generally doesn't have the same amount of profit as never has the same amount of profit as our own people working on projects. So that could also be a contributing factor, as well as additional hours that are required when we have to hand over projects to new people because we have turnover. Those two things in and of themselves could account for this decline, as well as what we talked about earlier, not onboarding people as well as we should have. And with growth, if we're continuing to grow, we're stretching our resources. Our project management processes may not be keeping up with our growth. We may need to provide more training to our PMs and so forth. So total payroll multiplier, which is the sum of the first of the last two, utilization and effective multiplier. This is really where the rubber meets the road, because you can have utilization moving in one direction and effective multiplier moving in the other, just because of how you're emphasizing the importance of each one to your employees. You can easily get an increase in utilization by encouraging people to put more time on their timesheets, but that'll typically show up as a decline in the effective multiplier. However, this year, with both metrics dropping, we saw a 0.06 decline in the total labor multiplier. This is the first significant decline since 2010. You can see here on the 10-year average, it's been a nice trending upslope until 2017. And I just believe, it's the culmination of all the things we've talked about on the last couple of slides. Firms are growing very quickly, adding a lot of new employees, issues with knowledge transfer as we have turnover, onboarding processes that perhaps aren't as strong as they need to be, and then our project managers being strained by the increased work that they're being expected to manage. And what happens when utilization rates drop? Typically, overhead increases. And in this case, that is true, although it's only 1/100% or 1% of direct labor. But it's really ending what has been a fairly robust decline since 2011. That high at 173 dropping to 162 and all the way down to 154. We may be seeing that this is an indicator that firms' overhead is going to start to creep up again. I hope that's not the case in the long term, but it could be increased costs, just simple things like increased cost of recruiting and onboarding. That is a cost. Project transition cost, increased non-billable costs for business development, lots of different things that can be impacting that. It's not statistically significant, but it is an area that we'll want to see if this trend continues over time, or if it levels off in this 154, 155 range. When you look at the how firms compare in the upper right-hand corner here, you can see that the high performers, their overhead rates are not a whole lot less than most other firms. If you look at all others at 154 and high performers at 156, that's not dramatically different. However, those large firms with a 166 overhead, firms that are in the medium and small categories will have a cost advantage over those large firms in terms of proposals, with a 10, 11 point or even 19 point difference in overhead rates should mean that from a cost perspective should have a competitive advantage over the larger firms. Whether that translates into new work in areas where the larger firms have greater depth and so forth would have to be seen. But clearly, all things being equal, the small and medium firms should have an advantage in terms of pricing. All right, net revenue per employee. How are we in terms of right size of our staff as compared to the amount of work we have? You can see this is a fairly large decrease, over $7,000 per employee, and this is the first decline since 2010. We've been on a nice march up over the years of increases. Some years being very strong, others less so. And now this year we've given back a significant amount. This number has flattened out sooner than expected over the last 2 or 3 years. But if you look at labor utilization and a net labor multiplier, that this isn't necessarily a surprise. Perhaps could reflect function of the large scale hiring in some sectors. Overall, about a 4.3% staff growth on the survey, and all the costs that go along with that. Perhaps they need to, as I mentioned earlier, to expand or improve or do more training with respect to project management or business management functions that need to be revisited. It isn't unusual when firms are growing rapidly for them to outgrow their processes and procedures that worked when they were smaller. You can't take a 50-person firm and become a 100-person firm over a 5-year period without having significant growth pains in processes that were designed for that 50-person firm that just really don't function as well with a 100-person firm. Also, when we dig down deeper into the data, we see that firms that have more mature project management disciplines do tend to have higher revenues per employee than those that are investing less or have invested less in project management discipline. So while all of the other things are negative, the one thing we would like to not see positive is employee costs, increasing about $753 per employee over the prior year. Not a huge amount. It's been tending to plateau for the last 3 or 4 years. It's been growing over the last 3 or 4 years, and hopefully it's finally starting to plateau. A lot of those costs were in benefits, increased retirement contributions, increased medical and other benefit costs. So it's nice to see that this is leveling off, and we hope it will continue to more than level off. One point that's really very interesting is when you start to dig down into the data, that firms that offer benefits and more benefits, such as medical 401k, performance bonuses, paid overtime, they are, as expected, going to have higher labor costs. However, on the flip side, those firms tend to have a much higher employee retention rate. So when you're looking at your investment in your employees, you want to make sure that you're providing good benefits, and as said earlier, making it a destination of talent, being the firm that people want to come and work for. And a lot of that has to do with how happy your existing employees are in their role. They will recommend and encourage other people to come there to work. Accounts receivable are heading in the right direction. At 71 days, the average outstanding balance it's been declining since 2011. Pretty much 1 to 2 days per year, but it's definitely headed in the right direction. The one challenge is that the smaller firms are clearly challenged with respect to collections. And that can have a lot to do with many different things. Principals who are anxious, not anxious to make collection calls, a lack of processes for following up with customers, making sure that they got the invoice, making sure that the invoice provides the customer with all the information that they need in order to get the bill processed and paid, and then following up as appropriate, just to see, hey, I just wanted to make sure you have everything you need to pay the bill. It's now 45 days old. When can we expect payment? Again, that can be some of the challenges of smaller firms, but it's our money. We worked hard for it. We definitely should be paid for the efforts that we made, and we need to stand up for ourselves and make sure that we are going to get paid on a timely basis. So what are the top challenges facing financial leaders here in 2018 and forward? You can see that increasing profitability, managing growth, top 2 in terms of the combined first, second, and third selection in terms of importance. So really it just points out that this whole growth period that we're in is creating a lot of financial challenges. it's potentially negatively impacting profitability. It's causing us to need to improve our onboarding processes, improve project management skills, and then coming on right behind that is the ownership transition challenge that's hanging over the head of many firms. I know we're working with quite a few right now on helping them to structure these changes. And that's something we call a hard trend. A hard trend being something that's not going to reverse and we can't change. People are going to continue to age, and transitions are going to continue to be a very important part of the management of AE firms as we move into the coming years. So with that, Kaylee, we're ready for our first polling question. What is the primary approach you are taking to accomplish your top financial initiatives? And we provided a few possible answers. Business and project management training, upgrading or improving your ERP system, adding additional management level talent, all of these things or none of these things. So if everybody would please jump in there and answer the questions, and we'll see what kind of results we get. Watching these graphs as people vote is sort of like watching a horse race. So right now, business and project management training is leading by about 10 points over all of the above. All right, so the results are in. 47% of you said business and project management training, 29% all of the above, a 9% adding additional management level talent, and 5% upgrading, improving your ERP system, with a strong 10% none of the above. So not a surprise. I think this is pretty much what we would expect to see in terms of our experience working with AE firms. So when we look at what the survey said, pretty much on the same thing, they're going to spend money on improving their business processes, which mirrors exactly what we found in our poll here, followed by forecasting and managing our growth. Those things are, the first one and the third one really, I think, are very similar in terms of what that looks like. Managing growth really is about improving our processes in most cases, getting the right people in the right seats. The bus would be the other perspective on that. Better forecasting, that is always a challenge because it's a moving target. Professional services being based so much on the efforts of individuals and projecting how much effort it's going to take to finish projects certainly makes it difficult, very difficult right out of the gate to forecast results. And that is something that is challenging in all professional services, particularly if you have a lot of fixed price projects that you assume you're going to come in at a certain margin or certain profitability, but if the project heads south, you're not going to recover any of that. Whereas with your time and materials projects, it's going to be a little bit more level in terms of profitability. These initiatives will cost. They're going to cost money, either bringing in outside individuals to help with your process improvements or spending time internally, which is a cost as well. But it's going to be a long-term improvement and can, to hopefully prepare your business for the next growth spurt. But I think many firms are going to be looking for outside assistance just because we don't have the bandwidth internally to take on a lot of these challenges. Firm valuation. This was the first year that this was actually the survey question. How many firms have annual valuations as part of their firm management, their overall financial reporting. And you can see that the benchmark or the average is pretty close to 50%. Smaller firms tend to have it less often. Larger firms tend to have it more often. Firms that plan to have a valuation done next year, you can see a fair number of firms plan to potentially add to or continue to have a firm valuation this year. We believe that this is an important part of your firm management because of the obligation that exists to buy out your existing shareholders. Even if you're an ESOP, you still have to fund those. Of course, in that case, you most likely are having an annual valuation, but you need to fund those buyouts, and not knowing the amount is going to make it difficult to plan for that. So that's going to lead into our next polling question. Just want to get a sense how our audience here today compares to everyone else in the survey. Have you had your firm valued in the last year? And if yes, but longer than a year ago, no, but I would like to, not sure. Just need a few more here to get over that threshold. All right, so survey says 51% of those of you on the phone today have had an evaluation done in the last year. Very much mirrors the survey. 18% no. A good chunk of folks who are not in the know as far as whether we had one. 2% no, but would like to, and 7% yes, but it's been a little while. Firm valuations historically have been very expensive, and I think that many firms have shied away from having it done because of that. However, it doesn't have to be that way. There are different approaches to valuations that impact the cost, and that's based on what you're planning to use it for. So keep in mind that you don't necessarily need to have that 250-page valuation done if you're just wanting to know and get a sense of what's the firm worth and what kind of buyout might we be looking at in a few years. A letter valuation kind of approach can be very economical and valuable as you move towards a need to have ownership transition. Just a couple more, or actually one more slide here with the financial information. Return on equity, that is basically our pre-tax income, that net operating income, divided by equity times 100. And that has dropped significantly this year. You can see in 2016 it was 25%, 2015 it was 29%, dropping to 14% this year. And I keep coming back. I know I sound like a broken record, but is our growth, are we growing faster than our systems are able to keep up with? And as a result, our actual profitability is declining. But the other piece to this could be that as you've added equity over the last several years, the denominator has increased, the numerator has stayed basically about the same. So that could be in and of itself driving this return on equity down. So it'll be really interesting to see next year what kind of results we find and how it compares to this year. But you can see those high performers, 30%, they're still doing extremely well as compared to the rest of the industry. So actually pulling up the entire metric. And again, there's a lot of different metrics here. We look at them not individually, but as a group to get a sense of the financial performance of our firm and where our strengths and weaknesses are. I like to use a phrase that says a single metric is lonely because it can give you a really poor representation of how the firm is truly doing. You could look at, say, utilization and it's way up and we think, wow, we're doing great. And then you look at your effective multiplier and it's way down. So we need to look at the different metrics together as a group and from there evaluate what decisions we need to make. So enough of me droning on. I'm going to turn you over to Susan, who is much more energetic and enjoyable to listen to than I am. So Susan,
I don't know about that, Scott. I will do my best. All right. Well, welcome everybody, and we're going to kind of shift gears here a little bit, and we're going to move on to the business development side of the world. So I just want to confirm, I don't know, Scott or Jesse, if you can let me know if everybody can see my screen, the proper screen with the slideshow.
Yeah.
One of you just kind of. Awesome. Okay, great. So we're going to jump into business development. I don't know if they kept the best for last or made me last just to make me last. But when we think about business development, it's kind of the lead in, right, to everything that you've already heard from Scott today from a financial standpoint, but as well as from Val and Christy last week, if you were able to attend the webinar that we did last week on project management and HR and talent. In order to kind of feed any of those machines, obviously you need some type of business development or some type of way to drive business into the firm. And this is one of those areas that firms continue to struggle with year over year. Very often it's one of those areas that kind of, I don't want to say totally neglected, but when you think about, running your financial statements, getting bills out and checks in the door, money in the door, managing your projects, keeping your people happy, often business development or driving new business kind of takes a second seat behind everybody else. One other thing that's going on in the business development world or with firms is that, as we look into the future, firms need to kind of start looking to diversify, to kind of find ways to kind of bring new business into their organization. So we'll look at that a little bit as well. So what's going on here? All right. So the first thing that we're going to look at here very quickly is net revenue growth forecast. And as we kind of look at this, you'll notice that high performers and small businesses are flat. There's really no increase, or they project no increase in growth in their revenue in the upcoming year. Overall, it's down slightly. But when you look at the percentages of everyone else, with the 7.5s and the 6.9s of projected growth for these other firms, that's pretty ambitious. That's pretty aggressive. Based on the other statistics that we're going to be looking at from a business development standpoint, you're going to see that firms that are trying to push this much growth in their revenue in the next year or so, 18 months, they're really going to need to continue to improve processes and really kind of look at diversifying their organizations in order to achieve those lofty goals. So the proof is in the pudding, so to speak. We'll see when the 2018 results come out from the Clarity Survey next year to see how these guys actually do perform. So we'll kind of see how that floats out for everyone. You know, it's pretty steady, not a whole lot of change. These other firms are projecting that serious growth. So I don't know where you all on the meeting today kind of fall within that, but I would kind of look at this and say, where do we fall within this? Are we kind of holding steady like the high performers or the smaller firms, or are we projecting higher growth? Next area that I want to look at are the challenges. You know, so we can kind of look at and understand some of these other metrics that we're going to be reviewing here today, or what were the top challenges that businesses were seeing over the last year. And oddly enough, or maybe not so oddly enough, the top 4 are actually the same as last year. We see a lot of themes in here where it's revolving around limited time and limited resources. You look at number 1, finding the time to nurture client relationships. You know, that's a time-consuming process, but it's so crucial to our businesses to nurture those relationships. Also, limited time for business development. Tagged into that is that increased competition and really trying to identify brand new prospects. So those are the top 4 that were there last year. They're the top 4 that are here this year. And when we talk about the time and the resources, I think that we're going to kind of see how that all kind of ties together when we start looking at, well, who's responsible for these things? And we'll talk about that in a little bit. One of the things that firms can do from that regard, and I think Christy may have touched on it in her presentation, is do we look to expand our staff and bring on more business development type team members to kind of help with the time needed to drive new business as well as nurture relationships? Those can go hand in hand. Or do you look at your processes and procedures in order to become more efficient and effective with the current staff that you have? And so, you know, building out processes and procedures, establishing go, no-go processes, really making sure that that lean machine that you have is performing the best that they can with the tools that you can give them, I think is key with some of these challenges that we see here. When we move forward and we look at the initiatives then, one thing that kind of strikes me as a little bit odd is that the challenges that we just looked at were around time and resources, and, you know, competition was mixed in there. But when we look at the initiatives are all built around strategy. So they're not necessarily addressing their biggest challenges with their initiatives, but they're kind of looking outside of that and saying, okay, we got to have a strategy here that goes beyond the time and the resources. And how do we do that? How do we bring more business in from a strategic standpoint through identifying opportunities earlier in the process? Expanding teaming options. How do we get on more RFPs, or do we get into more proposals by teaming with multiple people? Identifying better opportunities, or better identifying opportunities, right? The whole go, no-go process. And another one, kind of the number 4 here, kind of ties into that time and resources. Do we expand or look into expanding, cross-training our staff to do business development? You know, kind of taking that model of everybody sells. The key thing here is being strategic. How do we get ahead of the competition? How do we get our foot in the door first? And if you do get your foot in the door first by identifying opportunities earlier or teaming with multiple teaming partners and getting your foot in the door first, then how do you capitalize on that? You get that foot in the door, but then you need to focus on your processes, on taking that through to fruition and follow through and win that work. So those are the key initiatives and key drivers here. So I'm going to jump into my first polling question here. And we're going to talk about who is responsible for that business development in your firm. Is it your executive team? Is it project managers? And I would say primarily, right? Because sometimes there might be a blend here. Project managers, do you have a dedicated business development staff, marketing staff, and other? And let's clarify, right? There is a huge difference between a business development and marketing staff. So again, we need to hit that 85% for the CPEs. We're getting there. Kind of interesting what I'm seeing here. A little bit different than what the overall results of the study were. So certainly, you know, having different people in different events and in these surveys kind of changes the dynamics of the answers or the percentages. And as we're kind of trying to get up to our percentage here as well, that's one thing that I want to mention is if you don't participate in this study, please do, because the more people that participate, the more valuable and more intuitive are the results, because we're spanning more folks. All right, we're almost there, guys. Somebody wake up and hit a button. There we go. Awesome. All right. So as we look at the results here, you know, 41% is the executive team, and that's a huge percentage. 14% are project managers. That's kind of that seller-doer model. 37% of you actually have dedicated business development staff, and I think that is awesome. Kudos to you guys for having that forethought to bring in team members that kind of help drive that. We have some marketing staff and some that are listed as other. So as we kind of move through and we look at what Deltek has come up with in the study, I think that, you know, certainly with your 41% on the executive team level, you're kind of in line with the number one. You guys are also in line when we talk about often. Dedicated business development staff certainly is number two, and project managers is three, which is kind of what we're seeing in the poll today. Although the study did come up with overall more project managers than I think what you guys are saying. If we look at actually the high performers, as Scott had defined who the high performers were in the onset of today, high performers in the results are more likely to use project managers for business development than others. That certainly kind of creates its own challenges in and of itself with making sure that people have the time to do what they need to do from a project management status as well as from business development. And one of the other things coupled with that is that relationships is one of the top challenges. So if you go back in what I have for a couple prior slides, that key client relationship is one of the top challenges of organizations. And so you kind of have to keep that in mind when you're talking about your business development, your overall strategies for growth of your firm, who's doing what, and the fact that a lot of business comes from repeat clients, that you really need to stay on top of that. So who is responsible for that? Project managers do take a lot of that burden on themselves because they are interacting with them daily and making those connections. Who's got the time to do that? Make sure that you are nurturing those relationships regardless of who is on your business development team. And you also want to look at your business development processes to optimize time. Whether you're utilizing an executive team, which the majority of you are, you know, they have so many responsibilities within the organization. What do you have in place from a processes and procedures standpoint to optimize their time so that they're able to drive the business development, win the work to help feed the machine. When you talk about also utilizing processes within the organization, whether it's project management processes and procedures, or from an accounting standpoint, a financial standpoint, as well as hiring new staff, one of the key focuses that are listed as an initiative is that business development process. Are your processes documented? Do you have a system that is accessible by all that need to be involved? And as you can see here, larger firms have processes documented. Our high performers are on the lower end of that scale, which kind of surprises me a little bit. But when you think about having a formal process documented, and you look at those that have a process, that equates to, in the other analysis that the Clarity study provides, is that equates to a higher win rate and a higher capture rate. Also, if you have that formal process in place, you're also going to reduce the duplication of effort, where everybody knows what their role or responsibility is in the process of driving new business, which will equate to more time for other activities. So if you have that executive team and you have a process in place where maybe there is delegation, then it frees them up for other activities in the business. Same thing with your seller or doers. You know, if they have certain pieces, they're going to free up their time to better manage projects or better manage relationships with the existing clients. So I'm going to move into my next polling question. And the next question is do you actually have a documented business development process? So we do, exclamation point, cheering you guys on. You have them, but they're not yet documented, which I know is an extremely time-consuming process. I think Val talked about that a little bit in our project management side, that, you know, having processes and procedures, but actually taking the time to document them is really a time-consuming process. Some people don't, but they would really like to in order to be more organized and streamlined. And others, they don't care. Don't have them, don't care, don't think that they need them. Again, we're crunching down. This is the last polling question, I promise. So we can get up to that 85%. Cruising right along. So close. Awesome. So as we look at the results here, 21% of you, and I'll give you a big clap here. Congratulations. You do have your processes and procedures documented. That's great. There's a large percentage of you that actually have processes and procedures, but they're not documented. So that's great that you have them. I think sometimes taking the steps of getting them documented and kind of in paper also helps you improve those processes. So I know it's time consuming, but really kind of writing them down and stepping through them that way helps you look at them and improve. Some of you don't even have processes and procedures, 34%, but would like to. And there's a small few of you, I think that was just to kind of jab me a little bit, that says you don't have them and you don't need them. So as we look at part of processes and procedures, one of the areas that the Clarity study looks at is a formal go, no-go process. This is one of those things that kind of helps you identify whether or not you're going to go after an opportunity. And the thing that strikes me interesting here is that 67% say that they do, and that has gone down by 8% from last year, which is very interesting to me because I know that a lot of firms that I meet with and talk with that they're striving to get a better go, no-go process in place. So as you look at the numbers down below, 35% do it for all opportunities, 24% for strategic ones, 8% only for new, that are for new clients or prospects. 12% aren't, but they're considering it, and 21% say no, they don't at all. And the other thing that strikes me interesting is with that 21%, let's say 21 out of 100, 13 have said that they have no interest whatsoever in even ever considering a go, no-go process. So that surprises me. Maybe those are firms that really just work with a lot of repeat clients and don't really have a need to kind of make that decision as to whether they move forward or not. But the key thing about having a formal go, no-go process is that it helps you position your firm to go after the right projects for your firm, to make sure that you are positioning your firm for success. So I have 4 things listed here to consider for a go, no-go. So whether you have them today or you're thinking about doing them or you have them in paper or you have them somewhat automated, you know, some things to consider is this an existing client? Is this a client that we have a good relationship with? That certainly ups your likelihood of a win. Are you familiar with the type of project or the work that needs to be performed? A key one that sometimes people don't even think about is the client's budget realistic, right? If you're going to go after work where the client doesn't even have a realistic budget of what the project's going to take. So even if you do move forward and win that project, are you setting your firm up for profitability and success in that regard? Or quite frankly, was it a strategic pursuit to get your foot in the door, but then we'd have to get into the conversation of, is it worth it to lowball in order to get your foot in the door and kind of establish that precedence, right? Those are things that we talk about all the time with clients is does that make sense? And when you talk about geography, is it an area in which you serve or want to pursue and get a foothold in? And so this is 4 examples of many of the things that people include in a go, no-go process. I highly suggest that you kind of reevaluate your process on occasion to make sure that it still aligns with your company's strategic goals and the services that you provide and where you want to be in the future. Win rates have gone up. So this is a good thing, right? We've increased. We're now at 50%. We've gone up almost 10% over the last year. And you can see again in this regard, our high performers are performing higher than everyone else. One of the things that you can do to kind of help increase that win rate is teaming opportunities, right? Many of you look for opportunities or a project, a potential project that's out there, and find a way to get on everybody's ticket so that somehow you are included if you are a sub and you're teaming with others to kind of team up with many people that are going after that to increase the likelihood of you winning the work. So that's a great opportunity. You know, networking events and other things kind of get in with other companies to kind of help partner together so that you both can win more business. And again, using that go, no-go process to help position your firm for success. You know, win rates are up. I'm hoping that that means that firms are being more strategic about what they're going after, making sure that, you know, they're positioning themselves with projects that they're able to win and kind of using that go-no process to be clear about should we go after this or should we not, and increasing that likelihood. And quite frankly, utilizing their team's time better by pursuing projects that they have a better chance of winning, right? Spending time on something that is a potential loss in the end doesn't help anybody because you have to put as much time into preparing the proposal and the specs and the estimate on the ones that you're losing as opposed to the ones that you're winning. Same amount of time. So let's use that process to focus on those that we have a better likelihood of bringing in the door. And obviously, another thing that can contribute to win rate are those repeat clients. Are we working with the same clients over and over again? And again, that goes back to one of the other challenges is nurturing those relationships, right? You need to make sure that you are nurturing the right relationships so that your win rate is increasing at a rate that you want it to be. And the same thing on capture rate. Capture rate, this is actually the first year that they surveyed on the capture rate. So we don't have anything to compare it against. Next year, obviously, we will. This is a little bit lower than the win rate, where the capture rate is calculated on the value of the proposals that are won versus the total value of those submitted. So having a lower rate may mean that you know, you're winning more work, but they're of a lesser dollar value, or that there's more competition and possibly you have to lower your rates a little bit in order to win it. One thing that I would advise here is with the capture rate, win rate, that's hard to say, and the go, no-go process is that you might want to reevaluate. If you did your go, no-go a long time ago, you might want to reevaluate your criteria to see if it still aligns with your organization. And the other thing to consider is that when you look at the top challenges of a company, one of those is relationships. And when we look here, that 53%, up by 17% from last year, that firm's revenue is coming from their top 3 clients, is a time when you really need to take a hard look at nurturing those relationships. I'm kind of torn as to the fact that this is in the top challenges of a firm, is nurturing relationships or maintaining relationships, and it's not on one of the strategic initiatives. How do we better nurture these relationships? If more than half of your revenue is coming from them, you need to make sure that you are nurturing those client relationships. Because I guarantee you, if you're not, there's certainly a competitor out there that's willing to kind of step in the door and do that for you. For a lot of firms, lack of diversification, whether it's in various market sectors or client-based, is a potential financial risk. And obviously, project management is key when it comes to the fact that you have so many eggs in one basket. The last slide here that I have is on market position. So again, as they look forward into the next 18 months, what are the areas that people had indicated that they're looking at growth? So certainly if you're positioned in any of these areas, you know, in the top tiers, you're certainly positioned for some great growth and potential. If not, you know, can you diversify? Diversifying obviously takes a lot of time to do so. So it's not something that you're going to look at this survey today and all of a sudden you're going to insert your foot in that market. But again, as you see these trends coming, you want to make sure that you're ahead of your competition and not following. So the last note that I hear as we're kind of wrapping up for today is that measuring all this stuff is great, right? It's great to see all these metrics. It's great to kind of see how you compare. But if you're looking at them and you're not taking note and looking at how you can take action on some of these to improve them, to better yourselves, to better your firm, then what's the point, right? Analyzing and looking at things is fun, but come up with an action plan. Obviously, you can't affect everything, but at once, focus on certain things. And as Scott has indicated, with a lot of these financial metrics, they kind of go hand in hand. So when one thing goes up, another thing may come down, and come down, I mean in a positive way. So that's all I have for today. I believe that we have some questions that have not been answered that have come in the questions panel. I think that some of them may be for Scott, and I think that Scott may have had to drop off of our event today, so I'm just going to kind of put a holler out there. Scott, are you still with us in the event?
No, he had to catch a train. We will have those questions responded to them via email as soon as we can.
Okay, awesome. That's what I thought, but I wanted to confirm for everyone. So any of the questions that have not been answered yet, we will make sure that we will get back to you personally. And then before we let everyone go, again, for those credits, please make sure you respond to the survey that pops up as we close the event today. That's absolutely crucial for you to get your continuing education. So I hope that we've provided you some insight, maybe some tips, some value. If you need anything, please don't hesitate to reach out to anyone on our team. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.